Hi, my name's Catherine. I am the California campaign manager for One Fair Wage. We're here today to allow restaurant owners and workers to speak to SB 476, which would change California law to ensure that workers aren't required to pay for mandatory food handler training, and counties inform employers about all available options for food handler training. Thank you to all of our partners, SEIU California, California Labor Fed, California Fight for 15, and especially to Senator Limón for championing this bill and the rights of California food service workers statewide. To kick us off, I'd like to invite Senator Limón to speak.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. I know that it's important to have a presence, but I also know there's some folks that couldn't be with us today who are still here in solidarity. SB 476 will not just bring integrity back to our state mandated training, but it will also provide workers with an opportunity to start on the best foot they can for their employment opportunity. Restaurants and ServSafe have used worker funds in such a way that it is not in the interest of workers' rights. Rights that California workers deserve and have fought for tirelessly, like a living wage, like health care benefits and sick leave. SB 476 is about closing a loop in our state law that has allowed an industry to fund lobbying efforts disguised, masked as a state requirement. A requirement that they help, a requirement that the same industry helped create about a decade ago. As you lobby members today, please remember that it's important that that we stress that this bill protects integrity in a certain space, and that this training is important to consider in terms of diversifying the options for employees to include in a state-run program. No one is doubting that the training is effective. What we are asking is for employees and employers to have options and also ensure that the funds that are used and collected by this state training don't then go and be used against the workers. I think that that's absolutely key, and we want to make sure that we provide a level of transparency for our workers and also our restaurant owners. Through this process, we've heard from multiple restaurant owners who they themselves already pay for the training, but know that it is so key to do this training and invest in the worker, because the alternative is that something can go bad at the restaurant, costing much more than the $5, $10, or $15 that someone might pay over a 3-year period. So I want to thank again everyone for being here and for help pushing this bill across the finish line. We have 3 weeks left here in the session, and your presence, your push, and your energy is going to help to get SB 476 across that finish line. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Limón, for sharing. I'd now like to invite Saru Jayaraman, the co-founder and director of One Fair Wage, to speak.
All right, thanks everybody. Thank you so much to Senator Limón for being such a champion for all workers and for food service workers in particular. Let's give her a big hand. Really appreciate that leadership. This bill will address a long and sordid and ugly history that goes all the way back to the ugliest part of American history, unfortunately. After emancipation, the National Restaurant Association was formed right after emancipation in the early 1900s with the express mission, intent, and purpose of being able to hire newly freed black people, black former slaves, and not pay them anything and force them to live entirely on tips. The National Restaurant Association has been around since 1919, lobbying for the last 100 years, since post-emancipation until now, that they should not have to pay their own workers. They have suppressed workers' wages everywhere at the federal level and even here in California. And a couple of years ago, after fighting them for so many years, we found out that they've been doing all of that horrific lobbying work with the money taken from the low-wage workers themselves. Somebody within the National Restaurant Association leaked information to us that a majority of those lobbying dollars, to the tune of about $80 million a year, comes from a company they wholly own called ServeSafe that they created and bought about a decade ago or 2 decades ago, and then used the income from that company to pay for their lobbying expenses. Then they went around to various states like California about a decade ago and had bills passed requiring workers to not only take this training, but to pay for it. In other words, they are having workers pay money that is then used to lobby against those same workers' wages without workers knowing about it. And this is particularly egregious for California. There are 14 million workers nationally, 2 million, 1/7 of the entire national restaurant workforce is right here in California. That means that 1/7 of the income that the NRA has been gaining every year, $80 million, comes from this state alone. 2 million workers who are the lowest wage workers in the state who have had no idea that for decades the money they've been paying for this training has been used to lobby not only against their own wage increases, but against wage increases for workers, their fellow workers across the country. And so we were thrilled that the New York Times finally exposed this. We were even more thrilled that Senator Limón decided to take it upon herself, along with our labor partners. Thank you so much to our labor partners for making this happen. We want to thank and congratulate the legislature. The Senate already passed this bill. That is amazing. That is a huge, huge victory. And the Assembly, knock on wood, is about to do the same. And the governor's going to sign it. And we are going to take one huge step towards balancing the power of workers' voices compared to this long, long, long history of National Restaurant Association lobbying. I do want to say we are seeing tremendous momentum here in California and across the country for wages to go up because people are struggling right now with the cost of living. People are struggling with the cost of housing here in California. And being able to balance the voices of workers vis-a-vis the National Restaurant Association in that debate, which I know is coming here to the state next year in terms of the minimum wage in California, being able to balance the voices through this bill of the National Restaurant Association versus workers is going to be key to ensuring all Californians are able to survive, whether they work in the restaurant industry or other sectors here in this great state. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Saru, for that incredibly powerful speech. I'd like to now invite Ralph, who's one of our restaurant workers at One Fair Wage, to share his experience working in the industry and his opinions on this incredible bill.
Hi, my name is Ralph Prado. I've worked in the food service industry in roles of supervisory, dishwasher, prep cook, line cook for over 8 years. I've gotten my food handler's card at least 4 times, and I know the training is important. They teach you things like how to serve, store, and clean your workplace that protect consumers, and it's important to a restaurant. It's important that we refresh this training every few years. One thing people don't talk about is that while some employees don't have their handler's card, some restaurants will turn a blind eye and let people work there anyway. Barriers for getting the food handler's card might be financial. There might be language barriers if you don't speak English, and you have to do this on your own time and in your own dime. When you're starting in the industry, it's just an extra hurdle for you to have to figure out ahead of time. So I was outraged when I heard that the restaurant lobby would use that money against us to keep our wages low. It is very hard to live on a restaurant's server's salary. I have to live in a multi-generational household that we share bills. It's difficult to find a car. It's difficult to find childcare. It is very hard. And so there's simply no policy rationale or justification for why this particular training program should be inconsistent with other mandatory training programs. And it's another barrier to stopping people from continuing or starting their work in the food service industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ralph. One thing that's incredible about this bill is that we have support not just from restaurant workers, but also from incredible restaurant owners who see the importance of paying for this training. So I'd like to invite Stella to speak.
Hi, my name is Stella Denig. I'm a co-owner of a small independently run restaurant in Oakland, California called Day Trip, and I'm here fully in support of this bill. We currently pay for this training, but we didn't when we opened. So we actually have a direct comparison of what it was like before and what it was like after we started paying for this bill for this training. And in fact, we've seen that it's helped our bottom line. So let's just start with the basics real quick, and I'll break that apart. What we're talking about here, the food handler training, is an exam that costs somewhere between $7 and $15 for the exam over a 3-year period, plus 2 to 4 hours of paid training. That is the maximum that it would cost to me as a restaurant owner per employee over that 3-year period. And I say maximum because, in fact, there's so much turnover in this industry that a majority of new hires for us already have this training. So really, it's diluted from that number. And I am not someone who uses this word lightly, but that is truly a nominal cost for us as restaurants and as restaurant owners in comparison to everything else going on. That's, you know, one delivery fee for one food delivery that we get out of the 50 deliveries we get a week or whatever it might be. And I think the most important point here is that the trade-offs in what I save as a restaurant owner when I pay for this training for my staff outweighs the costs by a long shot. As Senator Limón mentioned, on the highest end of things that could go wrong for this basic health and safety training when not implemented correctly in my restaurant, which, by the way, I am liable for as a business owner, the worst case scenario is something that would absolutely shut down my business and be certainly not worth that compared to the $15 plus training cost of it. On the lowest possible end, even a small mishap would still lead me to need to comp a meal for a guest, and even that comp is more than the cost of the training. So I'm financially incentivized to pay for this training, and legally motivated because I am the one who's liable. So we've also noticed from when we didn't pay for the training to when we started paying for the training, people were more focused. They took their time to learn because they were being paid for those hours. So they really learned the materials thoroughly, and we had fewer mistakes. Direct incentive. And, you know, finally, I think it's just important to note that restaurant workers are also some of the lowest wage earners in the U.S. I've had, you know, one of my employees told me they had 47 cents in their bank account recently. Another one was living out of their car for a year when they started working for us. Another one had their car stolen recently, then had health bills pile on, had to take some time off. All of those are examples of people who might actually not have $10 in their bank account to spend on this training. And for me as a restaurant owner, it actually helps my bottom line. So, you know, last note, it's really important for me as a business owner also to keep competition in this industry high, to attract great candidates for these roles, to make this an industry that really can be a career, that is a viable industry for people to work in. And if front and center on a job description is that you have to have this training and pay for it, that's going to turn people away from it and incentivize them to find another job. So it's, again, good for me in this industry if we can have legislation that mandates this across the industry so that everyone needs to do this, making this a more viable industry for potential restaurant workers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stella, for sharing. I'd now like to invite Sally Flores, who's an incredible barista and has lots of experience with this training, to share his experience in the industry.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sally Flores, and I have worked in the food industry for 27 years as a barista. Our bill, SB 476, has two parts. First, you have heard in February that there was an NYT article about how the National Restaurant Association was using worker money to lobby against the workers. This is happening because right now many businesses, workers pay for their food handlers training programs. Our bill, SB 476, would require employers to pay for this training instead of allowing workers to pay for it. I have had an exceptionally positive experience in the food industry, in the food service industry. As a barista, I love what I do. One thing that has made this experience so positive is that I've worked in cafes and coffee shops owned by people who truly care about their employers. One way they express their care is that I've rarely paid for my own food handlers training. Most of my employers cover that expense for me. This is important for restaurant workers who are amongst the lowest paid workers in California. Getting our food handlers card costs money, but more importantly, it costs time. You have to look up how to do it, sit down and take the training, and deal with the administrative time required to have your employer recognize the training. When every dollar you make counts. This time, food service workers can't afford to lose. But beyond the warm and fuzzy feelings, I've noticed the positive impact this process has on the safety of their customers. Employers paying for the training of their employees make better workplaces because they're able to emphasize the parts of training that are most relevant to their businesses. For example, as a barista, I have never handled raw meat for work, but I deal with safe temperatures of milk in cleaning workplaces almost every day. While I do know all parts of the food handler's training, the reality is that the parts that I remember best are the parts my employers reinforce with restaurant policies. This isn't a professional license. It's basic training. Food safety is a workplace training that is ultimately the responsibility of the employer, so it makes sense for them to pay for it. The second part of the bill requires that the state lists the options for food handler training online, one easy list. Right now, there is one major food handlers training option, ServeSafe, which is owned by National Restaurants Association. Until I learned about this bill, I honestly didn't know that there were other training options, which I would have gladly chosen. When a company like ServeSafe has a monopoly on any service, it reduces competition, raises prices, and lowers the quality of that service. Showing other options for food handlers trainings would increase competition and let employers pick the best and most affordable and sometimes free training options. I think that everyone in this industry deserves the same opportunities I've had and deserves to take the pride in the work that they do. An easy place to start is to ensure that employers pay for this training. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally, for sharing. I'd now like to invite Ian, who's an incredible activist and also a barista and aspiring bartender, to speak.
All right. Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Ian Malloy. I've worked in the food industry for the past 4 years, as well as being a student. And like was alluded to, I've worked as a barista, a bartender, in grocery stores, movie theaters, restaurants, almost everywhere that requires this food handler certification. And I'm here to talk about our bill, SB 4476. As you may have heard, in February there was a New York Times article about how the National Restaurant Association was using worker money to lobby against workers. This is not something that I knew before this. This is not something I knew until I heard about this specific bill. In most businesses, and all the businesses I've worked for, the worker pays for their food handling training program. This bill, SB 476, would require employers to pay for this training instead of allowing workers to pay for it. I've been certified for this food handler's card twice. I think the food handler card is a certification that is essential for both the proper operation of the business and the safety of the customer. However, the safety of the customer and the safe operation of the business is the responsibility and the liability of the business owner and not the employee making minimum wage. Making restaurant owners pay for this training would force them to take it seriously and promote a safer work environment across the entirety of the industry. The second part of this bill requires the state to list options for the food handler training online in one easy list that is easy to find. Right now, like Sally said, there's one major food handler training option, ServeSafe, which is owned by the National Restaurant Association. Again, until I learned of this bill, I honestly didn't know there were other training options, and I certainly didn't know that my money was going to a company that was using it to lower to keep my wages low and the wages of my coworkers. When a company like ServeSafe has a monopoly on any service, it reduces competition, raises prices, and lowers the quality of that service. But the food handler certification is not just a service. It's an essential gateway training to a large industry that pays its workers, that in large part pays its workers the minimum allowed by law. Showing other options for food handler training would increase competition and let employers pick the best and most affordable option for training services. And also give the option of choosing a service provider that doesn't lobby against the basic needs of its employees. That's why I'm here.
Thank you so much, Ian. Next and last, I'd like to invite Mikey Knabb, who is the director of One Fair Wages High Road Restaurants program and also a restaurant owner himself.
Hi there, thanks for being here. I'll be quick because everyone here has made incredible points already. My name is Mikey Knabb, National Director of High Road Restaurants. We are a restaurant association with thousands of members across the country, committed to race and gender equity in our industry where unfortunately it is sorely lacking. This bill, SB 476, would fix an egregious problem, which is that there is a monopoly in the food safety training space called ServSafe, owned by the National Restaurant Association, and it uses workers' money. Workers are required to pay for their own food safety training. They leverage those funds to lobby to suppress the wages and depress the working conditions for those very same workers. Members of High Road Restaurants join our association because they would like to countervail that force. We would like a level playing field upon which we can compete based on the quality of our food and service, not on how fast we can race towards the bottom, suppressing wages for a workforce of mostly women and people of color. The magic of food and hospitality is that people connect in person over food. What we want is to make sure that everyone in our industry can thrive together. Ensuring that we as restaurant owners pay for the basic food safety training that our workers are required to know ensures that we reduce liability for risk of getting somebody sick. As Stella mentioned, one of our member restaurant owners at Day Trip, if you have to give away a plate of food, that costs more than the training itself. It's $15 or less, which is a very small cost when you're operating restaurants, but a huge cost when you're a worker making minimum wage. And the competition for workers is more fierce than the competition for customers now. You've heard of the Great Resignation. In our industry, it is not over. It's getting worse. We're not just competing with each other for workers in restaurants. We're competing with every other industry that exists. And when you're a worker looking for your first job, your next job, and you see a job listing that says you must pay for your own basic food safety training and come with that food handler card, or you need not apply, you're going to look at the next listing. You're going to end up driving for Uber. You're going to end up working in retail. You're going to end up doing any other job because restaurants are not an industry that treats workers with dignity, and that's because the National Restaurant Association continues to leverage worker funds that they collect through these food safety trainings called ServSafe to suppress wages and depress working conditions. Members of High Road Restaurants want a level playing field. SB 476 and Senator Limón and other strong leaders in the labor movement in California are making sure that that's what we can have. So we want to thank you all for being here. We're looking forward to passing this bill, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Mikey, and thank you again to all of our incredible speakers. Can we give everyone a round of applause? As Saru mentioned, the wind is really in our sails for all the work we're doing to bring justice to the restaurant industry. So if you're interested in learning more about the incredible work that One Fair Wage and our partners are doing to advance this bill and other bills in California, don't hesitate to email california@onefairwage.org. Thank you so much for joining us.